Hi everyone, welcome to today's lesson. This is the second in the series covering urban landscape sketching. So if you remember last week we were working on these small kind of tonal thumbnails, and I went through this collection of little landscape references that I came up with, kind of a diverse range of different landscapes that you could work from on Unsplash, so just kind of a collection I made up. You can of course work from life as well, from any of the videos in this series, but can be helpful if you want to work from a range of different kind of styles of architecture or locations that are going to be different to your immediate environment. It's good to be able to work from references, and there's like a really rich number of resources that you can access online nowadays. So this week we're going to be working on a line drawing. So last time it was kind of a small sketch that began as a very simple line drawing, and then we developed that into a tonal sketch, so it added values. This week I'm just going to be limiting it to exclusively working by line, so I'm not going to add any shading whatsoever. It's a style you come across quite a lot with urban sketching. If you look up urban sketching as a discipline, you'll see a lot of people work that way. It's quite manageable if you're working outdoors, because you're just working from line, and you can get some really cool effects. It's a good base to then do washes. So in subsequent lessons, I don't think in this first series, but subsequent lessons we'll be looking at doing washes and working in different mediums. But it can be nice to do like a pencil sketch, then do some quick watercolor washes, then work in pen over the top of that, just to define stuff. But yeah, today we're just going to be sticking with just using a pencil. I'm using a mechanical pencil like this, but you can use any kind of sharp pencil. Ideally you want it to be sharp, just because you'll get more precision that way. You could also work by pen. I'm not actually going to be erasing at all, so working with a pencil like this and working with pen is not enormously different. You kind of have a bit more control of weight of line if you're working in pencil, and pen is a bit more regular. Your option with pens would be to use kind of different weight of pen. So you could use like a 0.1 pen, and then a 0.4 or 0.3 or 0.5 or something like that, if you wanted to kind of emphasize things. Because I'll go through this a little bit as we progress, but you can kind of emphasize, almost give a sense of a shadow or a sense of darkness by putting a heavier line down or doing a double line. But that's something we'll cover in a moment. So I'm going to begin by kind of choosing a scene from these. So certain scenes will lend themselves to a line depiction more than others. Something like this you might struggle a bit with because it's quite tonal. You could maybe just work down that central section, but you wouldn't have a great deal of detail to go into. This one here is maybe a little bit too simplistic. Again, it would work better tonally. This is St. Mark's Square in Venice. It would work quite nicely as a line drawing. You have a lot of kind of contours of things that you can work on, a lot of interesting details through the whole scene. So that would possibly be a good option. These ones are all pretty good. This one's maybe a bit more interesting as a value study, just because the forms, the kind of planal forms of this building are quite interesting. It would be nice. I mean, that might be one that we do next week, to kind of look at that sense of light. This one here wouldn't be too bad. Again, there's quite a lot of detail. So what line drawings benefit from kind of large areas of blank space and then areas of detail. It creates a kind of rhythm within them. This one, again, it was probably a bit too tonal. It's a really nice tonal sketch. It's one of the ones we used for the thumbnail last week. I think I'm probably going to go for this one. So it's got a nice kind of balance of some detail, some larger sections, got a nice sense of perspective. We can kind of I'm going to try to create a sense of detail being lost as we go further back into the image. So as we get further back into this section here, it's going to get kind of looser, and up here it's going to be a bit tighter. So I'm just going to open that image by itself and set it about that big. We might zoom into it a little bit when we want to add some detail in a moment. So to begin with, I'm just gonna put a kind of little vanishing point roughly where I think it would go. So somewhere down here, I think it's quite a steep angle, kind of low down to the ground. So quite a low vanishing point, reaching up to the front of these buildings. If you struggle with one-point perspective, there are a few videos and some tutorials floating around on the course website. But you'll get a kind of idea. When I'm working from something like this, I'm not super strict with my perspective. I just kind of have it there as a guide and try to do everything kind of largely by kind of feel. You don't have to go through and do everything super detailed. So, adjust my paper. Camera slightly. Trying to get that to focus. Decided not to for some reason. There we go. So, I can kind of maybe roughly decide to begin with how big I want the image to be on the page. So, maybe about this big, not doing a huge drawing. I'll just kind of lightly block in that rectangle. For some reason my focus is being very slow. I might actually do it manually. Zoom out a bit. Yeah, it should be alright. So I'm just going to put a little bit of a note for where the corners of the image are. So, as I say, the vanishing point's quite low. We've got this kind of vanishing point right back into the distance of where this street is. Then the bottom of the street angles back towards us. So you can see I'm being quite loose with this one. Then got some lines that kind of go up there, and we can kind of block in the little sense of the back building, which gives us a kind of starting point. Then, so from that vanishing point, we've got some really steep lines coming up, so I'm using it just as a point to reference back to, and I'm working quite lightly still at this stage. Then we've got kind of the block of buildings ends. There's a little bit of a street. So as we work, we're just kind of thinking what building we're working on. I'm just kind of piecing in the skeletons of the buildings at the moment. Again, go back to that vanishing point. So I'm just using a 1-point perspective vanishing point. It's totally appropriate for this instance. If you've got a kind of a street disappearing into the background, 1 point works really well. Got a little chimney stack there. Another building coming down in the front here, and then they're all kind of sitting roughly at the same point back from the road. So having blocked that in, I can now kind of just shift over to the other side. So I've got 1, 2, 3 buildings, which you can kind of just see faintly. We're going to be working over a lot more heavily, so you'll start to see detail emerge. But to begin with, I'm just working really light, so you don't want to work too heavy, because you won't allow yourself, particularly if you're working in pen, you won't allow the ability to kind of correct anything which might have gone wrong. So I've got that bridge that crosses. Top of it roughly meets that little angle down. Then a kind of weird little shape, or boxy shape that angles back. So this is where there's going to be a bit more detail going on. This will probably end up being the focal point of the image, so I'm just still being light, but thinking quite carefully about how it's working. So I've got the little walkway built in now. So you can see it kind of starting together, kind of coming together, the skeleton of the image. So from this point, it's really just adding detail, because we know roughly where all these buildings are. I can put some of the divisions between different buildings, loosely sketch them in as well. Start to put sidewalks in. So it gives a little bit of a basis, kind of platform for the ground. So yeah, everything's roughly in. So from there, we're pretty much just adding detail with a sketch like this. We've got a sense of where all the major buildings are. We can just go through and add progressive detail. So as I say, we don't want to add a great deal to the background, so I can be really loose with that. Just put some suggestions of what's going on. Keep working quite lightly. The background I'm not going to go over a great deal, so any little kind of details and accents in the front or kind of the foreground of the image I can kind of add more detail to, but this back of the image I'm not going to add a lot to. I just want that to stay quite loose, so I want to know what's going on back there. But I don't want too lots of detail, because that's not the focal point of the image. So from there we can then look at kind of maybe the contour of the buildings in front of it. So they've got some interesting sort of shapes. There's some nice sort of fire escape shapes reaching up the back of it. So you can start to add those details. Can use that vanishing point to start to look for flaws within the buildings. Flaws is in F-L-O-O-R-S, not F-L-A-W-S. These buildings all seem fine to me. So within those floors there are then kind of little suggestions of windows. So I can just kind of lightly sketch them in. Got some doors down the bottom. It's going to be a little bit heavier with some of my lines because it's starting to get closer. But again, I don't want to get too heavy with anything. Just staying kind of nice and loose with it. Now, we've got the edge of this building. So I've done a slightly heavier line, talking about line weight, done a heavier line at the bottom of those kind of those sections of or kind of details in the building that are angling back. Here I'll do a double line. And that just creates a sense of there being a shadow, even though you've not actually you've not shaded in a shadow, but it's definitely apparent that it would be there. Then kind of lighter, I can put some lines that suggest brickwork, which is a little bit of brickwork on that side. Then on this side, the brickwork's broader, stonework's broader, just at the edge of the building there. That cuts back in, and we've got some windows. So just kind of going through looking for details. Can re-emphasize the base of these buildings. Not shading, as I say, we're just using line weight to our advantage. So we've got pretty much all of the background. We've got this little bit just up here to block in. On that side, and actually we've got the top of that building kind of, for some reason, angles back in slightly strangely. Got some little details on the top. It's like some trees, or I think maybe the top of some extra ladders at the top of that building. So now that we've got those blocked in, we can go to this bridge, which is going to be quite detailed, so I can spend a little bit of time on that. I'm not going to, as I say, I'm not going to add any shading. So there is actually quite a lot of shading in the bottom of this bridge. I'm just going to focus on thinking about lines and nothing else. So again, I can use kind of double lines. I can use start to block in some quite heavy lines. Can be quite detailed with these windows. It's got these nice little windows. And we also actually have, what's kind of cool about this is there's the windows behind that are kind of semi-visible, so we can just kind of suggest those through these windows, which gives a little bit of kind of nice depth to the drawing. And then we can also see a little bit of the buildings behind as well, so anywhere where those buildings are visible we can give a suggestion of them, which is nice, gives kind of like a bit more sense of depth, or kind of space being in that aspect of the drawing, which is nice. Emphasize the top, so there are some extra little details on the bridge. some kind of shapes in the paneling which are quite nice, worth kind of giving a suggestion of, I think. But that's not too bad for the bridge, so probably can roughly leave it like that. So then I can work on this building that's kind of immediately behind. Trying to work quickly. So the main thing with any kind of practice you're doing in urban sketching is work at reasonable speed. Generally, if you're outdoors and you're working, you don't have loads of time. And can work a little bit on this other building that's poking in front as well. It's the building that kind of connects. Then again, we've got some details going on in the building. So you can see I'm generally just going back to that that point as I work. My little reference point, basically. Got some nice big shapes coming out of the bottom of this one. There's a little kind of staircase going up into that shape. So they can be quite dark, those shapes there, because it's kind of cutting back into the drawing. If we're going to add value, that would definitely be something we would be adding value to. But we're not, so we'll just leave that as a darker line. So the darker line gives a nice suggestion. There's something kind of going on inside there. Can put a little bit more detail maybe into it. Maybe some detail for the little staircase going up. Then kind of got some larger sort of masonry shapes here. Nice little angle back. Got some kind of railings there. Got some plants. Can add as little line sketches as well, so we're not adding any value, but just adding a little bit more detail to this part of the drawing because it's nearer to the viewer. So that's generally that's the approach you take. So you're looking for things that are Nearer to the viewer, you've got more detail going on. Things that are further away, less detail. So that's not too bad for that side of the drawing. And this side, it's a little bit different. So there's a lot of like, quite a large number of fire escapes going on with this one, so it's a little bit different. And they kind of reach out, kind of cross, sections of them cross the path of kind of cross over those bits we've already worked on. So you can work them over the top. That's going to be fine because they're transparent anyway, something like that. So I had kind of counted on the fact I was going to be working on them, but because they're sort of cage-like structures, I know I can just add them over the top. And they kind of drop down again to street level. Connect those a little bit further across. Then there's kind of like another section here. Again, cutting back, and we've got kind of one more fire escape type thing to work on. It kind of sticks out from this section up here. I'm going to kind of let it break down a little at this point. It's not going to add too much detail. I want it to kind of feel like this is the central part. So if we were to start adding too much detail at this point, it would kind of start to draw your eye a little bit to the left. So I'm trying to think about where my focal point is and why. There's like another ladder kind of going up here, so I'll just give a suggestion of that type of thing going on there. Then underneath this we've got more of these kind of large entrances going on, so just kind of guess them in a bit. Put a little bit more detail into the sidewalk. And there's some more little bits of detail inside some of these. There's some like kind of shutter shape that actually goes across this bit here, which is quite nice. So just looking for those little kind of little touches that you can put in. Getting quite close to a finish now. So I'm just going to block that in. I'll get some more sort of window shapes up here. So everything's roughly blocked in now, so it's come together quite nicely. That's about the level of detail you kind of want to go for in a sketch like this. You can just keep adding details, so like you could get down to bricks if you wanted to. But I'm going to stop here with this one. You can think a little bit about, at this point, where you might like to just kind of add some extra darker lines or some accents, like where you want to make lines heavier. So if you had a pen, you might be going in at this stage and just kind of using a thicker pen to make things more pronounced at certain points of the drawing, kind of drawing the viewer's eye. Not adding tone, just reinforcing lines essentially. But yeah, it's a nice little sketch, this one. I like it as a subject matter. I think it's interesting. Definitely lends itself to a line drawing, so you'll find as you work that certain things definitely are better. Certain subjects are much better than others to make a line drawing out of. And this is one that definitely worked really nicely, which is good. So yeah, I could keep adding detail to my heart's content, but just wanted to just trying to get just enough detail that it feels fleshed out, doesn't feel too empty, but I don't want to overdo it. And you can see there's a definite kind of zoom in here now. You can see there's this sort of definite scale, kind of stepping of detail throughout the image, so it's just getting less detail as we go further back and more details we get closer in. But yeah, that's roughly what you're after with a line sketch. So I'll look forward to seeing what you guys come up with. As always, follow our YouTube channel for more videos like this, and follow the link through to the OCAD course page to sign up, and that way you'll get support from myself and other tutors as you work on all these projects. But yeah, that's it. I'll see you guys next week for the final lesson of this term, and also the final lesson in this series. So we'll be a similar sort of sketch to this, but we're working in value a bit more so maybe a less line detail and more value, kind of building up tone. But yeah, that's it for now, and I'll see you guys soon.